Okay, well, welcome everybody to April 22, our April Friday Live meetup. Thanks everybody for coming. Today, our main focus is going to be on FileMaker and BetterForms coding patterns or design patterns, but they're not all going to be total design patterns. What I really want to do with this particular meetup is be a little bit more interactive. So please, by all means, just jump right in. This is not, I don't want to make this a presentation on techniques that I personally use, although I have a number of different things, but I want to really kind of get a feel for what everybody else does and how they approach different types of problems. So we'll get into that in a little bit more detail in a second. I want to start off with touching base on our what's new in BetterForms. So I'm just going to jump into our public roadmap. You can find this, you can access either this through the website or through our marketing website or through the app. So we got a lot of things going on and a ton of things in this second quarter. This is a big one here. We don't have too much of a description here, but basically Eduardo, he's actually in our call here. He's working on full PWA support and offline support. So what that means to you is PWA support means the app will be able to be installed natively, and not natively, but as a web app on your device. Basically, you'll have the device will acknowledge that the app is a fully 100% PWA compliant. So that means you can save it to your desktop and your forms, not the data from FileMaker, but the forms and everything like that will still render even if the device is offline. It's pretty sweet. We haven't come up with the design patterns or the best practices and things and how we're going to approach caching that data. You can do it manually right now, but we want to give you some tools and some techniques and things like that to make it really, really easy. So BetterForms fully functions offline. So we're really excited about that because that's going to be great for apps that are like delivery apps and things that are really, really mobile, where you're either looking something up or scanning a bunch of devices and entering their data in that type of thing. Slack to Discourse integration. This is Discourse is our forum. So Andrew's going to present in that in about 5 or 10 minutes here. But basically, one of the things that we find is we have really, really awesome support, as you guys know. But the problem is it goes away. All right. So if somebody asks a question and it's not stored. So we want to take that knowledge that we've acquired and the conversational thread and push that into our forum. So that'll give us some longevity in that. BetterForms workshops, we're almost ready for those. We have a few little things back in our back end that we have to finish off. We do have a sign up page. You can sign up. I think our marketing page is going to be going live with these added on today. So the workshops are going to be a great place where we're releasing our our free test drive plan. So that means you can basically sign up for free. It gives you a 2-page app. You can build a ton of stuff in 2 pages. We have things like QR code, inventory scanner, app as a workshop. These are like prefix templates that pretty much work out of the box. Smart link email. You receive a link, you click on the link, it presents you some information. You augment that with a bit of other information, send it back. And the other template that we're working on right now is a support ticket issue type template. So you can embed a link into your FileMaker app. The user clicks on the link, it drops them onto a web app where they can see a conversation of the threads and a master, it's not a master detail, but it's a list view with all of the issues and then a detail view with the actual conversations with those issues. And then you can integrate that. So those are some examples of some things that you can build with the workshops. We'll talk about more of those in the next month. This is a really exciting one, is our Gui Page Builder. So basically it's a drag and drop page builder. And if we have a little bit of time, maybe towards the end, I'll give you a quick demo of where we're at with that, but it's pretty sweet. Basically it allows you to drag things on and off to the layout and design your pages very visually and still maintain responsiveness. This is something that's really, really exciting for us right here. And Christina just had a really great win with our team yesterday. And basically, we're upgrading some of the code in BetterForms, some of our base code, we call it. BetterForms has 4 sets of code base, depending on what you're using. You as a developer are usually building stuff within our editor, which is one code base, and then that's running on our base code. And that's the real sort of JavaScript and the Node.js background and all of that stuff. So we made an update here, and one of the updates that we made allows us to do recursive design for layouts. So that means you can take groups of layouts, put stuff into that group, format it in a column, put stuff in another group, format it as a row, and so on. You can keep going deep like that. That gives us pretty much parity with hand-coded websites in terms of user interface design. You're not limited to anything. So that's a really, really big improvement. That's going to be coming out in our new editor, but it's one of the things that we needed to push out to get the new editor live. And prior to that, we'll introduce that into our staging version of our base code. Couple smaller things, in-app notification. That's not, I wouldn't say it's on hold, but it's just something that's ongoing and running. And then we're continuing to make performance enhancements. You may see some things in the editor, some more errors and things like that surfacing. One of the projects we had last quarter was improved error support. So we're now trap errors at all different layers of the stack and push those upward. Some of those errors are intentional. For example, what happens when right now BetterForms is running in this tab, but the nature of Chrome browsers, it actually shuts down the JavaScript and it periodically wakes it up and then it shuts it down again. So it's kind of sitting idle. So really this is kind of disconnected from our cloud right now. When I click on it, it reconnects. So little things like that, that disconnection, we were actually trapping because of our improved error support. We're trapping all of those. So sometimes in the editor right now, you'll see an error message where you have the ability to override that. And we're going to change that in newer base code as well. Okay, and we also just pushed out an update just recently where we have our navigational slugs. So when you're working on a page, you can see here, I can actually no more editing JSON. This is all managed with UI now. So we can create those navigational slug paths really, really easy. So that's something that's that recently came out. We're continuing to make some little changes to that. If you have some feedback and you're using the staging editor, you can report those issues do get tracked. They go into our project management software and they automatically get assigned to the right person so that hopefully in time it'll work its way through the system and get fixed. Okay, and I think that is it for our roadmap. Let's go back here. Does anybody have any questions on any of that stuff? I'll take that as a no. All right, so I'm going to flip it over to, I'm going to stop my screen share here. I'm going to flip it over to Andrew if you're ready. I'm not sure if you need it for more minutes. And maybe you can tell us about what you're working on there.
Sure. I should be ready now. I've been working on a Slack app that lets you archive a Slack conversation thread over to Discourse. And we use a software called Anyden, which is a workflow automator that lets you make HTTP requests to Slack and to Discourse, and then have some functions that work together and make the message come together. So I'll share my screen here. And first, what I'll do is kind of showcase what it's supposed to do, and then kind of explain how it works. So let's say we had this thread here. Let's take a random one. Let's say we had this thread, and we want to archive this thread to the form. You can just click on here and post to form. It'll run into little magic.
You may be sharing the wrong screen.
Oh, yeah. Am I? Sorry.
I bet you there's some great Zoom stories about people sharing the wrong content.
There's that better?
There we go.
Awesome. So I was sharing the wrong screen, but
I'll get that.
So I clicked on, I'll use a new thread here. Let's take, here we go. We'll take this thread from Neil, where he had a question. And let's say we want to save this thread to the form. You would go here, you can press on the little shortcut here, post thread to form. It'll run this little magic. And then eventually, it says this thread has been archived. You can continue to this form link. And here it is. So it looked pretty simple there, but there's a lot of work on the end-to-end side to get this to work. I'll kind of explain my little journey on where I started and where it is today. First of all, I started with this little workflow. It was pretty simple. You call a webhook, which gives you a payload. Looks a bunch of JSON, hard to read garbage. But here you have the payload. It has kind of the message, the timestamp, and this is kind of the data you use to parse out the message. So you get the payload. You use the payload to get the thread, because what this does is it only gets the first message, but then you need to get the rest of the messages in the threads. Parse out the items, compile the message, and then post a discourse. Pretty simple, but this ends up looking pretty ugly because, for example, it looks something like this, which isn't very appealing. First of all, the users are actually privated on Slack. You only have the ID of the user from the message and not the actual user name. So you'll have to go get all the users and then compare them to the user ID and then swap out the names. But I'll get to that. The files are also privated. And another thing about files is they actually go away in Slack. So after, I believe it's a few months.
I think we get so many free. We're on the free plan.
Right,
so.
we're on the free Slack trial. So eventually these files disappear. So I need to take these files and upload them to Discourse itself, so it's there forever. And for now, it's privated, so can't even view them in the first place. And yeah, there's a few other things, but we'll get to it. So the next iteration of the workflow looks something like this.
I should just, sorry to interrupt you there, Andrew. N8N stands for node it's a concatenation of node automation. So nodemation. It's a free software. This is open source. You can pay. It's the company's located in Germany, the head office, and you can download this and install it and run it on your own AWS instance. It's fairly easy. It's very, very similar in many ways to Node-RED, which you may already be familiar with. The user interface is slightly different approach to things. But if you want to run your own instance, it's basically the minimal AWS instance, which is, I don't know, $7-8 a month and free for the first year or something like that. And you can have these types of automations for yourself and really, really easily. Excellent support community as well. Thanks.
Yeah, so this is the second iteration of the N8N workflow. What I did was I took the ID that I got from the messages. I sent another request to Slack to kind of get their ID and their avatars, and then I merged them back together, compiled the message, and now it should be looking a bit better. There we go. Now we have the names. We have the avatars. We're still missing the images, but it's a step in the right direction. So now we need to get to iteration number 3, where we need to kind of get the files working, because right now the files are still not working. They're still privated, and we need to upload that to Discourse somehow. This step probably took the longest, but if we go to this execution, it got a lot more complex, but I'll kind of step through and show you where the changes were made. We have a workflow down here, that's the new stuff, that makes the Slack file public and then turns it into binary, because Discourse only allows binary file uploads, and then merges them back together and then uploads it, which ends up looking something similar to this. So we're getting closer now. The files now work. They're getting uploaded to Discourse. There's still a few kinks to fix. For example, these names are inside the message and not the message user. So you need to actually get a whole list of the users and do the replace. Also, hyperlinks look different in Slack compared to Discourse. So you'll have to do kind of a search for these hyperlinks and format them correctly. But for the last execution, and this is pretty much where it looks today, where now this also supports multiple files, but it looks like a giant spider web now. So I won't go through everything, but if you take a look at the form link, we now have support for multiple files from the same message.
Awesome.
We have support for hyperlinks working a bit better. We have support for the usernames and dimensions inside the Slack message working properly.
And code blocks, I see too.
And code blocks, because stuff like this, if I can show you, Slack had them formatted a bit differently than Discourse does, because they had it without the escape here, which was escaping every text under it. So you kind of have to add a new line here so that it formats the post correctly. But I'll kind of show you the magic in the today's execution. So this is where the current workflow is. All of the magic really happens in this function here where I compile the message. And I had a lot of help from Eduardo here where you kind of have to use Regex. And what Regex is, it's sort of like a text searcher. If you need to find a certain string or a certain word inside a long message, you would use Regex usually. And all this function does is it searches for other stuff. It replaces the text for what you need. For example, the code blocks are encoded with 3, I believe they're called toad, the backwards ticks.
Backticks, yeah.
Yeah, and you just add a new line there. Chevrons were also encoded differently. They're coded with like an ampersand LT semicolon. Had to replace that, replace the Slack IDs, and then compile it together. And yeah, that is the gist of things. It's not fully complete, but eventually it will be ready for public use.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. So what I think a really neat takeaway here is that this could actually 100% be done in FileMaker. And you wouldn't need any, there's no tables. It could be just done in pure FileMaker scripting if you're, so whatever comfortable. We're looking to gain our body of knowledge with N8N and Node-RED. And the main reason for that is so that we can use that tool down the road, possibly integrated into BetterForms. So that's why we want to sort of invest in this direction in terms of rather than coding it in FileMaker. And there's just some things that it lends itself really, really well to doing these types of automation jobs and integration, because a lot of the integration very similar to Claris Connect and Zapier and all these other things. They're very, very, very similar. I think Node-RED and N8N are a little bit more program oriented or developer oriented. Than maybe some of the simpler interface programs, which I think would be a lot harder to visualize that whole workflow. Does anybody else use, I know Jason, you use Node-RED. Does anybody else use any automation tools? All right, like maybe Claris Connect, and maybe even can do a show of hands. Claris Connect, anybody use that? Don't all speak out at once, guys. It's okay.
I think it's an accurate poll.
Yeah, I guess so. But you know, give it a try. It's really easy. You can set up a free N8N account that's hosted. They have a cloud service as well, but they're downloadable. It's free, and you can play with it. Right, and it's really, really powerful. Same as Node-RED, very easy. Jason, do you have a blog? Is your blog live on Node-RED set up or no?
Yeah, I have a detailed step-by-step how to set up your own Node-RED server. I'll put it in the comments in a second.
Super, thank you. All right, regular expressions. Does anybody use those at all? Just one, Beverly. So I'll just give you a quick thing. Okay, this is a hidden gem that you may not know about. And if you're going to walk away with one thing, is just understand that this tool is there. Regular expressions evolved back when every byte counted on a computer. You know, you have, my first computer had a 1K of memory, so it didn't have regex. So, but the concept of regex is really, it's a string matching algorithm. and basically use very, very small symbols, question marks, slashes, things like that, to create a small string. And the string is maybe usually typically between, I say 3 and maybe 20 bytes long. So it's very, very small. And that 3 to 20 bytes long can find every email address in your entire document. So you basically say, and it's available, Regex is available in virtually every language. It's more or less a standard. There's slight variations from one language or adaptations, I guess. Or
I want to add that if you use BB Edit, it has an excellent tutorial on Regex because it has it, uses it. So it gives you examples of the patterns and how they're used. So
there's also I think it's Regex 101. There's also another site here, yeah. And I use this often as well. And basically you paste your text in here, you start writing your string up here, and it'll show you what it matches. You can use Regex to replace strings, and there's a lot of algorithms to show you, just to get an idea how complex this thing is. LinkedIn Learning has a course on Regex that's 6 hours long, right? That doesn't mean you have to watch it by any means, but just get an idea of what you can really do. It's incredibly powerful. And if you're writing all kinds of crazy code to figure out a string, Regex will probably do it much better and more consistently for you. And it's very testable. Okay, so I want to jump into our main topic today, which is code design patterns, and just sort of talk. First of all, we'll talk about what they are, and then maybe we can open up a conversation as to how you do certain things. Really, a design pattern is a way that you've come up with to do something to handle a specific problem. So your problem might be at one time, one of the common problems with FileMaker was updating files. So what the community invented was to keep the data in one file that doesn't usually mutate too much and separate that with the code and the user interface. And they called that a separation model, or separation design pattern is really what it is. So that's an example of a design pattern. And I want to talk about two things, mainly the FileMaker ones, and we'll talk about some of the ones that we've kind of emerged or we've discovered with BetterForms itself as a platform. We really do encourage participation, so please jump all the way in. So let's talk about that first one that I just mentioned as the separation model. That was a really popular model. Does anybody currently have any code bases using the separation?
Yes,
Yeah.
I do.
And how do you find that? Do you still sort of go in that direction? I think there's a couple people that said yes.
Yeah.
No, I say no.
And-
I say yes, but again, I think like SQL, so it's totally separated, and my data is my data, and my interface is my interface, and I don't have a problem with it.
Right. And so do you do that as a way of separating the thought, or do you do it for a physical constraint, like, for example, the ability to update a file?
Both.
Right. And Laszlo, how about yourself? You said you currently do?
I currently do because I'm working in a legacy system. And yes, I was a great supporter of the separation model. And I find in certain cases it's practical, and I am still not saying never again. The difference is when the actual app is in development. I have to touch both the data side and the interface side. So it's not a real separation in that respect.
And I think who else said they currently using it? Was it Avika? Was it yourself?
Yeah, I do it almost to like a religious fashion. Right? One of the biggest reasons I did it was I got a big solution that holds either a lot of images and a lot of data and a lot of tables. If I kept it all in one file, the entire file would be 100 gigs. So I had an issue years ago where that burned me. Then I switched, and I have literally 30 independent files acting as a data source and one main UI. And it helps because some of the files get really big and you don't really need the data, so you can swap it out with a clone and just keep collecting new data. There's a lot of benefits when you have like a really big solution to it. And I like it. It's clean. You can you can even create like a dev environment where you can just keep your UI file, but just take that and swap it over and for like some dev data files.
Right.
So,
So
it makes it helps.
when does it break down? I don't think any design pattern is ever wrong because they're designed to usually to solve a problem. Now, that problem may be just one developer has, or maybe a community has. You know, for example, if I can't really think about a certain aspect or a construct of code, maybe I put my code really, really small chunks, or I just like these massive scripts. That's my design pattern. So it's not wrong. It's just a way I may or may not do something. So what would you say that the main reasons why you're still sort of using a separation model is more for clarity of thought than is what it sounds like? Is that correct?
And for my purposes, a lot of it has been just one was preference and thought, and then it was just maintenance to be able to maintain the solution in case one, let's say I had the server crash and one file came back with corrupt. Okay, cool. I can isolate the issue to that file, not all the other tables connected to it.
I see.
So now,
Yeah, I also separated for some of the same reasons. And size of the files was one of the data files. Being able to back up the different data tables at different schedules is also advantageous. And then the real reason I started it was shortly after 7, I believe. And internet was not very fast. And I had a client with a lot of files working out in the field, literally in the farm. And so his interface was on his laptop and just the data was on the server. And it just was so much sweeter to not have to download all of that stuff from the interface over remote.
I'm playing Spirograph here. So another design pattern that sort of emerged in other industries is a model. Actually, this is model view controllers. UI is really view. And this is the model here, and it's model view controller type of an idea. And one of these the idea of model view controller MVC is that your controller is really, we already do this in FileMaker in all honesty. Your view is your layout, you know, Command L, Control L going into your layout, everything you're doing in there. The controller is effectively the scripts or the actions that you have associated with various buttons, and the model is your data model. There's a lot of overlap in the Venn for FileMaker because we can have some controller logic right within our relationship. So that means when we can do things like auto enter stuff in FileMaker, we can do all kinds of calculations and stuff. So those are really sort of controller related things. But I have seen some people use multiple files in this fashion and very successfully. But I've also seen some where it becomes very, very troublesome or a lot of extra work to try to separate those workflows out. With BetterForms, we actually do this almost exactly like this because we tend to do something along this line here. Let me just, I guess I copied the wrong one here. Let me put this back. And we sort of tend to take on this architecture here where we're working more like this, where we have the view, which is BetterForms. We have the controller, which is our scripts. And we have our model, which is really our DB, our tables. Like that. And that tends to work fairly well, I think, for our use case. And really, in terms of a design pattern, BetterForms was actually invented as a design pattern to deal with another problem. The fundamental problem was it was really hard for developers, FileMaker, primary FileMaker developers, to edit code that was in, say, some PHP file that's stuck on a server that's pushed up. And, you know, they've FTP'd it or however they've got it onto their server, and they have to log into the server and use some kind of like Notepad++ or something to edit the code. And everybody, if you've probably done this a zillion times, go and change one kind of thing or change a field, and then now you have this, maybe some code, the original code, and you have the code that's on the server, and all of those kinds of problems. So BetterForms takes the architecture of let's create this demarcation line, you could say. And basically what we'll do is we'll say, this is FileMaker over here, and this is not FileMaker over here. And there's a very well-defined line between the two of those. So that is the way we sort of do coding. And you can do this in any system. It's not a BetterForms only thing, but we can separate those things very, very cleanly as well.
Hey,
What
Charles,
about, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say one thing that does suck about the separation model when you're doing a lot of files is leveraging the native security controls in FileMaker, like user accounts and all that stuff. You either got to create your own UI, which is, yeah, it's cool, but it's not the right way.
Right.
So you got to create extra functions to every time you make a new user account to go and make it in all those files or in your permissions. And so that's the one that troubled me for many years until I finally got around to actually creating the logic to handle, like, from the UI, go ahead and create this user with the specific permission set in all my 18 files.
So FileMaker or Claris's FileMaker is very interested in that. Recently, there was a talk that I participated in, and those types of issues were basically what we discussed: is how can they handle this going forward? How can they make things better for developers and such? And that, I think, was probably the biggest thing that this sort of brainstorming group touch base on is that kind of shared permission architecture. And people have solved it in different ways. I mean, we solve it with, we need to share the security privileges here with things that happen in the front end. So we usually use an architecture that we came up with called HAM. We have some presentations on that. But really and truly, FileMaker in this case becomes the source of truth. So we kind of keep it that way. But when you're dealing with multiple files, for our perspective, because this is effectively like a firewall, it doesn't really matter back over here. These can all be on the same account because we're not dealing with that as such directly. So there's a lot of times you can take design patterns, and if you're having a real difficult problem with something, it's to look at it in a different perspective, right? I always use security, like I like the Walmart metaphor, is if you're just dealing with security, it's really hard to control security in Walmart. You know, you can have the cameras and the beepers and the random aisle checks and all of that stuff. But you can also just make it like, it's really easy to control shoplifting in, say, a McDonald's drive-through. It's almost impossible to shoplift there. And it's it's a different design pattern because the access point or the attack vector is very small, but it's a different way of solving that exact same problem, right? Doesn't mean it applies to everything, but for certain types of stores, Amazon, for example, I don't think shoplifting, at least in the sense of out of the Amazon store itself, is an issue. Maybe the porch pirates and that stuff, that's a whole different issue there. So that's a couple different ways of looking at those design patterns there. What about Selector connector? That was another design pattern that came up. Anybody use anything like that?
No, I looked at it for a bit and I was like, it's cool, but I never forced myself enough to get into it.
So would you say it wasn't like the benefits didn't outweigh the resistance or the barrier to learning?
Maybe I can't really give a pinpoint why I didn't. I think it's just like maybe too much reliance on connecting everything to make it work with that pattern.
Yeah, that was my problem. It's too much
like-
reliance on that.
I've got a couple of older solutions that I built from the ground up with Selector connector, but I found, especially coming into pre-existing solutions, you can apply it to just one thing, like one part of your graph, but wiring up the whole graph with it is usually not necessary and not always a good idea.
Right. So like too much kind of thing.
One of the issues with Selector connector is because everything's working on a single layout. FileMaker finds don't work because everything's basically in a portal. So if if your users are used to using finds or the FileMaker finding procedure, it really impacts the availability of that.
Right.
I found actually it's excellent in some respects, and there's workarounds for things like finds. The only downside, as far as I'm concerned, is possibly speed. In respect of expanding modules, adding new modules, etc., reusing code and stuff like that, it's amazing.
So I think Selector Connector would have taken off more if it wasn't called Selector Connector and it was called Selector. That's why.
Well, actually, we did have Todd Geist in Toronto, and he was at the time thinking what to call it. Something like super something, and all kinds of ideas came up, and I think he decided then to go with Selector Connector.
What I mean though is it's two things that solve two different patterns. It's not one thing. And from hearing the conversation, people are saying, well, it works for this, but it doesn't work for that. Somebody else said works for that, but it doesn't work for this that well. That's because there's two different things here, right? There's a selector and then there's a connector. The connector is a UI construct. It's really designed to give access without losing context from a given layout, right? The selector sort of does the same thing, but it's really about the data and writing the data. So we use selector almost exclusively, but we have no purpose for the other half.
I agree.
Whatever
I
half
think,
is which.
The
So here's an
connector
example.
is pointless. I don't think that there's a need for a connector, but the selector, I think, has huge possibilities.
I don't know. Let me just see if I can find a file. I'm just going to think about a file that I can use here. Give me just a sec here. So I'll show you how we use it. Actually, I'll show you how we use it in our base code even. Just going to pause here for a quick second. And because we have the UI problem taken care of in a different approach, because we primarily use BetterForms as a front end, we have no purpose for that connector part. But what we do have is we do have some use for the selector part. So I'm just going to reshare my screen here. So here's how we use it. Let me just zoom out. And you've probably seen this before. This is the entire table occurrence for a BetterForms backend, right? This is it. That's all there is to it. And the reason it is so incredibly simple is because it was done that, first of all, it was built from scratch up as a front end less or a headless type application. It's just pure data and scripts, and that's it. There's virtually no relationships other than very core relationships between a few different things that we needed, which is FileMaker does fantastic. And then we have a selector over here. Oops. So we have this selector, and we use this exclusively for writing records. We sometimes, very seldom, and hardly ever though, is we use it for fetching data, but usually for writing records, because we can, first of all, we can write things as a transaction if we wanted to. We only have one use case where we actually needed to, and I'll talk about that as another design pattern in a second, but mainly because it's really easy, right? When you have something so simple like this, that means you can abstract it out. You can turn it into dynamic code. I can refactor a whole bunch of things that write data, and I can make one universal script that writes a record. We just pass it a JSON object with an ID and a table, and it takes care of the rest. We can do it now, we can do it later. We have a lot of flexibility like that. So that's what we do. We use this to access our tables. We do the same thing.
Charles,
Yeah, go ahead.
can you open the selector table just
Sure.
to see how many? Okay, you have one. Okay.
Yeah, we don't share these because there's times that I need to do some stuff over in this table, then I need to do some stuff in that table. You could probably put these all into one, because we always use primary ID, like a universally unique ID. So there's never a problem for that. And somebody added this. I'm going to find out, and we're going to get them. What do they? Who would do such a thing?
Yeah.
Oh, I see why they did it. See why they did it? They put it, say, oh, I can't put it here. Charles is going to flip it, right? So we'll have to move that. That drives me nuts. So there's a couple little edge cases. You can see there's some edge case things going on over here, right? But not every spider web is perfect, right? Some of them sometimes spiders make mistakes too. All right, so we do the same thing. Here's another design pattern, is universal delete. And this one is a really, really neat design pattern because it makes deleting stuff really, really easy. If you have a whole bunch of items, I have an invoice, for example, and then I go and edit the invoice and I change 3 line items or delete 3 line items. I add another 5 line items more. I've effectively, because we're doing this programmatically, we're not doing it through a user interface. So I'm not deleting a related portal record, which takes care of all of that. FileMaker is great that way. But how do you do that from an external system calling in and saying, hey, I want to update this invoice? Now we have 3 old records, 4 that get changed, 3 new records, some kind of variation like that. So if we can keep track of those IDs, the orphaned IDs, in some kind of iterative loop, all we have to do is pop the IDs into this list. Those are for the line items. Maybe we deleted a contact as well. We pop that universal ID into FileMaker list. So it's a return separated list. And we pop it into this record here. We create a new record in the deleter. Then we put all of the IDs in there that we want to delete from any table. And then we just delete that record. And this has the allow deleted or delete that
function.
Yeah.
Hey, so are you saying you can put like a multi-key value? Like you just
Exactly.
put one. All right, that's cool. I've done multi-keys kind of the other way. I haven't seen this is cool. So yeah, you just throw it all in there and then just hit delete, and then the cascading delete is just sweet.
Exactly. Does it all at one time, yanks it all out. And you can put as much in there as you want, and it does it fairly performantly. Right. So that's, by doing that, we don't have any deletes that are related to relationships. So I think it's a really nice design pattern sometimes when you have some kind of I want to delete maybe delete an organization, and maybe it should delete a subscription and delete a plan, and maybe it should delete some other stuff. But that's not always clear as a system gets really, really big. So the problem with that is it may not be clear about what's getting deleted. So now these deletes are explicit, right? And we wanted to do that and to make these deletes explicit because, first of all, then they can be tracked, right? We can put it in some type of an event log. I'm about to delete this primary key. And maybe there's a small script that can sit in front of that delete routine that says, oh, you want to delete this key? Let me just go log that data just in case you make a mistake. I can go grab those records. I can go grab those records super easy because I just put that primary key over here. Actually, I don't even do that. We just use a get column. We use a SQL thing, but we can grab those records super, super easy, and we can log them, right? So we can do that because we do deal with intellectual property, and there's a lot of human energy that's gone into that property. The data is highly, highly valuable, right? So that's really, really important to be really mindful about how we go about doing that. So that's one of the ways anyway, that's kind of an adaptation of Selector connector, but it's really just Selector and deleter.
Charles, may I ask something? Why you are using, we started by using UUID, and then quite recently, we are using the record number, the record ID, the internal record number, because when you make a list of UUIDs, is 36 charters in every UUIDs. And if you need dashboards or maybe display things and so on, we rather like to use internal record ID. I don't know if you get what I'm saying.
So you can use there's a FileMaker just to augment what Giancarlo is saying. Is basically FileMaker has an internal ID. There's a number of metadata. It's an internal record ID. It starts off at 1 and goes up from there. Can't use that in here because this could be one record 17, and this could be record 17. So I can't use that.
You should make the same one on the left side. You should put one field for any table for every table.
Yeah, have you ever seen there's a meme, and it's those kids games where you have the triangle block, the square block, the circle block, and the kid goes, oh, circle block, and then they turn the circle block sideways, and the circle block sideways is rectangle, right? It's a disk. So they put it in the square block, in the square hole. Then they take a triangle, and they turn it sideways and they put it in the square block, and they all fit in, right? The takeaway there is, if it is physically impossible, oops, where did my picture go here? Sorry. Oh, we're like over here, I think. If it is physically impossible for an ID to be confused with another, that same ID and something else, it will never, ever happen.
The square. That's right. It goes in the square. Sorry.
Sorry, somebody found it?
Yeah, I tried to post a link. Not sure if that link's gonna work.
Right, but it's a great simple meme, right? I think it's a whatever it is, video clip. So that's my concern. My other thing that we do, and then this is not something that you can do, but I learned this from Steve Winter, and I think it's quite brilliant. Is in every table, instead of just using get UUID, let me find a table here. Here
You put the record number.
It's instead of get UUID, when you create the ID, what we do is we augment it with something. Okay, and the reason for that is when this ID is floating in the wild, right? When you got some ID, you have no idea where it came from because UUIDs are not human readable. But by putting some kind of prefix, 2 or 3 letters in front, now you know exactly where that ID is from. So when you see a list of these IDs for debugging, for that few times that you do need that, this is a huge lifesaver that way. So that's just a simple thing. I don't know if anybody does stuff like that, but that's something that's really, really simple.
Charles, I
Yeah.
did read that it's faster to use numbers when indexing and searching, etc.
Oh, I don't care about speed. I wasn't. Oh, this is just getting a UUID. It wasn't using, like, you mean UUID as a number?
As a key though.
Careful with
Using it
that.
as a key.
I encountered some issues when I try to pass it over in a JSON.
Yes.
Using JSON. So be careful. I started using the number, but then I switched back to the UUID, and I haven't experienced any speed issues with that.
Were you encoding? Like a UUID as a number is not a number. Like you can treat it as a number, but when you're passing it, I think you should probably consider it a string. Although
There's a function
Yes,
called
that was the
number.
way it worked. Yes. Yes.
Get UUI number is a very large number that is too large to be handled in JavaScript.
Yes.
And the data API transfers that or encodes it as a number, not as text. So it's very difficult to work with it when you're doing an integration.
Same experience here. Yeah.
Yeah, that happened to us too. I truncated to 15 digits, and that works fine. Which 15 is pretty safe when you're considering a system that isn't too.
But see, that you're doing is you're working around that now, right? Which that's something I kind of disagree with, because now you're solving one problem with something, but then that creates another problem, and now I'm solving that too. So
that's true, but speed is important. So I don't know if it does have a speed implication, then I'm willing to work around it.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't personally encounter the speed issues too much because most of the speed things are related to deep data objects and some kind of crazy sorts and things like that. And we virtually never do that, right? When we're building front end apps with BetterForms, virtually that never ever happens. So I never really incorporate or encounter those kinds of things. Where are you finding the speed issue? In what process or workflow?
Well, I didn't want to get into it because it was mentioned in several posts by some known people, and I figured it would be good practice, to try and keep things faster. So it's not a big deal for us.
Yeah, I think it's really theoretical, and it's been proven. Yes, but you have to have such an enormous number of records, and then you have to be concerned about imperceptible performance difference in many cases. And so you could be switching up your approach in order to achieve a benefit that nobody will ever notice, except in some very rare.
So there's two axioms there. There's the don't optimize early type approach, but if you also at the same time, if you want to build a system for speed, for performance, you have to pretty much do that from the get-go. So There's and I think the real skill in a developer is to know what to optimize and what not to. Like, hey, I shouldn't add, like, I shouldn't have 500 of these unstored calcs in something. But at the same time, I don't know if it's really necessary, especially when they're one-off workflows. For example, I'm going to create a new invoice and I hit the new invoice button. If that takes literally 1,000 times longer, so 1 millisecond to 1 second, it probably doesn't even matter. Like, I click and now I'm ready to type versus I click, I'm ready to type, right? And so it's not instant.
No, it's not about creating though. And
no, I'm using that as a silly example, but what I'm saying is there are workflows that run once, and there are workflows that iterate.
I totally agree. But you know, doing a get left 15 isn't really an issue, so it's not a hard thing to implement.
I guess you gotta look though. Is it? I don't know what the numbers are, but is it? It sounds like if as soon as you decrease the entropy of a number, there's a higher probability that you're going to have collisions.
Yeah, but 15 digits, you know, for most systems is pretty safe.
What about data integrity? I thought the whole point of having a UID was to have a very unique record so that nobody else, right, could guess that number, right? Because when you start to have sequential numbers, and this was a fear that I had all along, right, was that if I have if I start a record at say 1001, eventually somebody can go in the browser and type that number, and now all of a sudden they're accessing information from somebody else. And I thought that that was the whole point of the UID, of having the UID as the record.
You're saying, yeah, for obfuscation. So there's a combination of two things. I think you're sort of on the right track there. The UUID, because it's sufficiently unique and it's big and ugly, it's very impossible-ish to guess, right? If you could guess a UUID, you can pretty much guess any bank access thing too. You'd have the equal skills there. So it's pretty much impossible to guess because it's so big. But it also guarantees uniqueness, which is really important, because when you can guarantee sufficiently, like 1 in 10 to the 100 or something like that chance of a collision, then you can do tricks like have one single table, one single ID field that can point to 100 or 1,000 tables and billions of records in each one of those, and not worry about pulling up 2 records in FileMaker. So you're not going to have those kind of collision issues. So you can take advantage of some things that way. Let's jump off to the next topic here is graph layout and anchor, buoy, star, spirograph.
Hey, Charles, I just think before we move on, we should just quickly say, I just want to put up a big flag of caution for using record ID as a key. This can be quite dangerous because you can't get those back if you wanted to move records around. Import import records. You're going to get new numbers. So I guess if you're strictly relying on the data migration tool for your migrations, I guess that's not really an issue anymore, but still, it can be pretty dangerous. I would switch to using a serial number if you want a sequential number. And also, a side note, I wouldn't say use a FileMaker serial number. There's problems with those. If you do live development, I would use a scripted solution. Like if you look on scalefm.com, there's a sample file for creating unique sequential numbers.
So that's a good point, right? Is you can't, what happens if you go and delete the record and you recreate the record, you restore it, it's got a different ID, right? Now, if you're just using it in an ephemeral kind of way, like you're grabbing the ID, for example, underneath the hood, the connector, typical interfaces, like when you're coding with PHP, it's usually mutating the record based on the ID, but you go fetch the ID first, and then you make that change and it happens right away. So you're not saving that ID and then going back to that record like a month later, which may not be there. So yeah, there's a lot of implications that you have to really watch out for. I do know that there are considerably less, I think, with a universally unique ID. How about graph layout? What do you guys do for that? Like, as far as the original idea of anchor buoy was designed as a mental map, so it keeps things straight from a contextual point of view. We kind of most of us, I think almost everybody in this meeting reads from left to right. So the anchor is on one side, and all the stuff is all of the table occurrences are hanging off of that. Do you find has that changed? Are people still kind of designing apps that way?
Well, there were articles by Kevin stating beyond anchor buoy that there are times when your redundancy is horrible, or you're having to go many hops to something. So it kind of depends on, you know, where you're going from here, whether you use anchor buoy or not.
So I think it's almost, so would you say then, Beverly, the choice is not so much from a practical or a technical aspect, it's more from me as a developer, I need to be able to wrap my head around this stuff, or is it kind of a combination?
Well, and that's why a lot of people jump to it, because it was easy to understand that I've got this TO and it's tied to this layout, and now my anchor can, you know, pull up all these related things or go to related based on where I am at that time. And so it's a context of where you are that allows you to go from that anchor beyond. And it was a lot easier to understand for most FileMaker developers. Whereas you get into something that's, you know, totally connected, like you would see in an ERD and SQL. Of course, we can't do that in FileMaker because we can't connect twice, you know, in a way that would sometimes we have to do an anchor and a buoy. But if it gets really, really complex and you're having to make many hops, then you're in trouble for a lot of things, especially like the execute SQL. And now we've got card windows. So some of that goes away because you can get a link of an ID, pull up a card window and do a find that really isn't even a go to related at that point. That gets around a lot of that problems that we had with so many anchor buoys and having to repeat, like in a database I had, I wanted to have an icon show up for a particular kind of item, cell phone, you know, or mobile phone, or, you know, work phone, or so it was different icons, a printer or non-printer, and I had to have a little connector for each time that's shown on any layout. And to me, it was sort of redundant. It would have been nice if we could do like an execute SQL at that point, where we can't for container view. So we're kind of stuck with that.
Are there any other design layout type things that people use on the table occurrence graph that are new or something? I mean, this is my demo file, so it doesn't have much on here, just like some really basic things. And I've seen some really pretty stuff on here, like what people have done. And I think everybody will agree that if it's the neater it is, the easier it is to follow.
Actually, I have never used Anchor Buoy. I always hated it because it made my life as a developer way harder to look for stuff, especially in big solutions with hundreds of layouts. It was practically impossible to locate the right.
So what do you use in place then with this 100 layout solutions?
So the thing is, I inherited it, and it's a total chaos at this point when I got there, because it is more than 10 years old, and it is a bunch of patches over patches over patches done by all sorts of different developers having totally different standards. So at some point there is an Anchor Buoy here, and at another there is a spider web, which is practically like a carpet bombing of table occurrences, all connected in very different patterns.
So
Yeah.
That's crazy. So what I started doing is creating functional groups,
Okay.
which serve multiple layouts, but sort of. So it's not that it's bound to a single layout. It bounds to a specific function I have to perform in different layouts, doing different things. And in certain cases, I connect these function groups. In some other cases, they are standalone.
So would you put inside these groups, you would put in, let's say I got some groups here and I'll just squish this in here in typical FileMaker fashion. I'll just move this in a old random spot to make it almost impossible to understand.
Yeah, this is what I inherited.
I went and inherited this system. So this would be a functional group based on what, like an invoice or something like that?
Well, not this way, a much better organized way. So it is sort of, it looks like Anchor Bui, but it's not used layout by layout.
Okay.
So I can jump from one to another without changing the functional group. I can jump from in between layouts related to the same group. And yes, I am adamant on properly organizing them, so no relationship lines crossing each other and stuff like that. It's quite readable. And there is a code, a 3-letter code. Sometimes it's 4, but generally it's a 3-letter code for the group. So when I go looking for a table occurrence, the ones belonging to the same group starts with the 3-letter code. They are in the same physical order, and it served me quite well.
Right. So the naming of the groups. What about that? I mean, that's a sort of a design pattern as well. It's not just, this is clearly a design pattern because it relates to how we actually physically associate the relationships of the data. The naming of the table occurrences and things like that. I wouldn't want to get into a naming convention thing too much because it'll go off track a little bit, but that in some ways is I guess an interpretive design pattern, if that's a thing. So
hey, Charles, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Of Laszlo? Laszlo, I'm a little unclear about what you're saying, because normally with Anchor Bui, your anchor would be the basis for not a single layout, but normally a set of layouts. So if you imagine that your solution is divided into different sort of main areas, like you've got a customer area, and you've got a, say, a sales area that's got quotes and orders and invoices. When you're jumping between the different areas, you aren't, you're jumping between different anchors, but within any one of those areas, you would be staying on this, your layouts would be based on that same anchor table occurrence.
Well, I hope I understand what you are saying, and we are pretty on the same page here. Just tell it to other developers who create one table occurrence group for each and every layout they are working on.
I didn't know that anybody did that. That's interesting.
Yeah,
it's very painful.
It was.
Yeah,
so yeah, that's what. It's now just the naming. You call that Anchor Bui, I call that functional group. And functional group might include more than what you include. It's not necessarily the same nice squid-like look, but yes, it's pretty close to what you described as Anchor Bui.
I think there are some very different understandings of what Anchor Bui is, because it's not just about what it looks like. In my mind, Anchor Bui means that every table has one and only one TO that is designated as an anchor, and anchors never attach to each other, and context is always established from an anchor. So that would mean layouts and any calculation in a field definition, such as a calculation field or a validation calculation, things like that.
Now, what I have is slightly different. Yes, the head of the Anchor Bui should be only once there, but these groups can be connected, but only by the heads in my design. So like when you go from invoice to items, well, maybe it's a wrong example, but anyways, or orders and invoices, you can connect the head of the order with the invoice.
So it sounds
if it's not in the same.
It sounds to me like really the choice here is about being able for the dev to be able to wrap their head around it.
Yes.
More than a functional choice.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, but there are functional concerns. So one thing that Hansa discovered a couple of years ago, and he's written about, is the performance implications of having large table occurrence groups, because your performance goes down exponentially when you add TOs to a talk, because certain actions are based on the number of relationships in the talk, not the number of
No. I know that, and I know about that. So when it's, I never allow myself to go more than 2 table occurrences deep when I set up relationships.
But when you're connecting them at the head, as you're saying, then you're in effect turning everything into one large table occurrence group. All your table occurrences are then connected.
Not necessarily. I'm more pragmatic than that. Not necessarily.
Yeah, only if you're doing all of them is my understanding.
Only if I'm jump to make it easier to jump from one to another, and that's an exemption, not the rule. And sometimes it's just to save time.
If I can sort of add to the mental models we're using here, the one way I try to think about Anchor Buoy is as the model component of that model view controller outline that you were showing earlier, Charles. Because FileMaker doesn't inherently have the idea of an object or of a model for a thing. All of that's existing in our heads when we're sort of looking at how these relationships tie together. What does that ultimately mean? You know, an invoice has line items which may have products or services. And I really think that if you look at an Anchor Buoy graph that way, as this is an invoice, what does an invoice have on it? This is a line item, what does a line item have on it? That simplifies sort of decisions about what needs to be connected. And I find that also makes it easier to teach someone else what's going on in my solution.
And
So,
I agree on.
Go ahead, Giancarlo.
I agree on this, and then another thing that we use Anchor Buoy, and we share Anchor Buoy with customers, and it's a way to comment and to explain what is behind the scenes that even the customer can understand. So I think that it's mandatory to use it.
Yeah, but I think that also illustrates the problem Beverly was describing earlier.
Yes.
If you try to use Anchor Buoy to solve UI problems, then you're sort of mixing your metaphors there. You're using it for both model and view at the same time, and that is exactly where I get into trouble all the time.
So that brings us to design pattern doesn't have to be an absolute though, right? In anything that we do, it doesn't have to be. It's not a hard fast. You have to stick to this.
Yes, I agree.
But it's not
100%.
mandated. So I'm going to jump off to our next thing here because I think this is going to be a fun one. Is loops. Let's talk about loops and how to get out. So let me just create a new script here. So we have some kind of a script and we need to iterate over something. All right. How do you do it? Somehow
I use your kill switches.
Okay, I'll just mention that what Dan was saying about a kill switch. This is exceptionally important. You run this and it's there forever, right? It's running on the server. It's impossible to stop this here. This is more of a safety thing. It's kind of half a design pattern. It's mandatory for everything that we build in any kind of loop because virtually every developer in our team has crashed the server before. Some of them several times, and me probably the most. So if you just run this script, of course, it's going to never exit. So I just mentioned that really, really quick. But if we create another script, I think I should have one. Let me just see one here. If we create a script here, this is an empty script, actually. Well, there, now it's technically empty. It has nothing in it. right? This is a perform script. I would call it escape hatch, emergency exit, kill switch, whatever it is. There's nothing going on in here. And oops, let me close this one here. Sorry, let me zoom Windows halfway. So if I, in this parent script, I have this loop and I say perform script, and the script that we perform is this kill switch one, there's nothing in here. Because there's nothing in here when we're debugging, FileMaker doesn't even jump into the script, so it's almost transparent, right? But what happens is when FileMaker runs the script on server, this script gets first loaded into memory and cached, then the script gets executed. If you go and make a change, you realize, oh, shoot, I don't have an exit condition. I don't have an exit loop if in here. I forgot to put that in, and for whatever the reason, the condition is. And I go and save that. FileMaker will continue to run the cache script. So you've blown up your server because you go and click the button again. Now you got 2 scripts running, 2 threads and 3 threads and 4 threads, and you don't figure it out until you reboot the server, and then you start all over again. So if you just throw this in here, this is just a quick tip, and I mention this a lot because I see it so often. Throw this in here. There's nothing in this script, so it doesn't impede performance. As soon as you realize that, oh, shoot, my script is not emptying and it's exiting, and it's running on server, all I have to do is I have to go into here, I hit halt, and I save that. Now, when FileMaker does the next loop, it's only caching the one it's running. The one that it jumps into, it needs to read again. So that's the one that's changed. It's been updated, and then it runs this step, and then it exits. Something, does that make sense? First of all, before I go on.
Yeah, Charles, I have a question on that because I think you talked about this one other time, and I thought about it. But wouldn't that kill everyone else's loop? I get if you're in a dev.
But what would you rather have? Would you rather kill it for 3 seconds or kill the whole server and then reboot the server? That's your choice.
Well, I'd rather just go to the server and stop a script. My fear is that I would stop someone's loop, one of my clients' loops.
How are you stopping it on the server?
Just go and close them out as a user. When you run perform scripts on server,
I don't know if that always works though. That's the only thing, right? Like I've had loops that I couldn't stop that user.
Really?
Yeah, the only way to do that is restarting the server. I was there several times, yeah, and it was my fault all the time.
Yeah, I found, I mean, we've had this, and I found it's not usually too much of an issue because it happens so quick that there's not much happening. And there is a detriment there. You could, somebody else could have some kind of an event that's happening and you've just truncated their loop somehow.
Charles, you could update this just a little bit to avoid the likelihood or avoid the problem that's being brought up.
Sure can.
If you were just in the calling script, so the one that's running out of control, if it was running this script by passing in, say, the name of the script, then you could put that over on this side and say if the name of the script is
exactly, and that's where I was going to go with this. You can do something, even just something like this, some matching condition, a halt, and then it only halts at one thread. Other people have mutated this in a few different ways, and I'll tell you one that Dan Smith has done is in here. He's created a custom function. The custom function does things like get user account, get script. And it puts that all into a JSON object, and any other environments, get the timestamp and all these kinds of things. So it can get the name of the running script, and you put that in a custom function in here. So it'll be something like we'll call it PSauce metadata. So as JSON. So this is going to return, let's say, that's a custom function that you create. You can create it on your own. And you pop this into here as a script parameter. And then, of course, that's not going to work. And then what will happen is that will grab the environmental information from the running script and pass it into here. Now, in here, you can get fancier in here if you want. We find that this is good enough, but if you want to get it fancier, if you're blowing up more often, you can do things like maximum iterations. So if this thing calls with the same parent is calling this script more than, 10,000 times or something like that, let's just truncate it. Let's kill it, right? So you can do anything you want from there. It's the design pattern is the technique, and then use it, adapt it to whatever suits you. But it just prevents you from blowing up the server, which I can't stress how important that is, as you guys all know.
Makes sense.
All righty.
Out of curiosity, does killing FMSE not always work in those situations?
No, because it's not. I don't know. For some reason, I haven't had good luck stopping it. Stopping it through a command line. I've tried to. There's a command that you can force kicking out or booting out all users as well, and I found that doesn't always work either. So
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I got the same
Engine.
issue.
If you stop the script engine, then it has to stop running any scripts that are running.
yeah, I don't know.
That's the thing that runs the script on the server.
Yeah, that works for me, but I still prefer to do it programmatically with a halt.
Yeah, I mean, it happens quick, right? So your server is now blown up. Sometimes you can't even log into the server if your CPU is getting mashed out. Like I've had that. It's like, holy crap, I can't even log into the server because it's just, it's totally railed. So now I'm going into my AWS control panel and killing the server, which how bad is that? Right. Anyway, it's just an idea. Like, again, as with any design pattern, if you want to use it, use it. If not, blow up your server. No worries by me.
Yep.
All right. So let's get into something. So let's say we got some kind of loop, and I'm going to use a JSON loop. So set variable, we'll call it the array. And actually, let's not do it this way. Let's do it this way here. Insert text, and we'll call it the array. And we have some array of data. I don't know. Right. And we need to iterate over that array. That could be values. I'm just using that because it's valid JSON. And I don't know if you guys use this as a technique, but if you need to put in bulk JSON into something.
I was just going to say that it's like I've been using this quite a bit.
Yeah.
Where I needed to add anything and I didn't have to mess with escaping quotes.
Yeah. Or building the object up with JSON set element, which is slightly painful.
Anything that you want to put in that, like you say, it's bulk, or
We do it a
you
lot.
don't want to mess with having to try to escape anything.
Exactly. So, so now how, and I wouldn't have to make a functional code because I don't want to do any live coding today. But how do you guys go about doing that? Like, do you do counters? What techniques do you use? Because I see some ways of very convoluted ways of writing loops. And I think there's pros and cons here.
It depends what the loop's doing, though.
Yes. Exactly.
So I want to create 7 records and put this value into each one of those records.
Well, you want to create new records. You have a fixed option of how many records you want to create, or there are conditions?
I have an array of undetermined length, and I need to create records, create a new record, and put each one of these in my field.
So
then first of all, you have to decide how many items, records do you want to create. So there is a variable somewhere, and then you might.
So you would do it as you would do something like count, let's say something like this, and this would be some kind. I'm just going to put 7 because I'm too lazy to type. But this would be like get array value count or get value count of JSON list keys or something like that, right?
JSON list keys, yes. Yeah.
Right. So we do that. Okay, got it. Yeah. What else?
Now, the next question is which order do I want to go, from the first to the last, or from the last to the first?
I'm fine from first to last conventionally.
So
keep going. I'm just going to let the dog at my door here.
What I use is a repeating variable to set the start value and the end value, and then go through the loop. I tend to, if I have an assumption of the maximum amount of loops I want to do, I tend to create a separate variable on the maximum amount, and I loop through until I reach the end or the max, whichever is smaller.
Interesting.
And then I can't go.
You build a fail safe in there in case some other.
In case if I know where is if I have a reliable assumption. This is dangerous. sometimes I ran out
Well, let me
before
ask you this then. What's the first couple? We'll just pseudocode this out, but what's the first couple things you put up in here?
again,
Like,
depending on the conditions, either I am
So the
before that
condition
I
is
go
I
to
have
the
seven,
first.
I have 7 items in an array.
Yep.
And I want to write them to file to records. That's exactly what you need to do.
I
Well, the
personally
first thing.
try to find the
Yeah.
count of
Okay.
the array.
Continue if you want to go from here. Get Rick.
I personally try to find the count of the array, right? So X
Okay.
equals
I
something,
got count right here. Yeah.
right?
That's
And
7.
or the records that I'm dealing with, right? Because sometimes my array is a bunch of records from a different table.
Okay, but this is not sometimes. This is it
Okay,
right
let's
here.
set the iterator to 0 or 1, whatever we decide.
Yeah.
Right, so just find the count, and then I said, normally like in Python, you would do variable plus, and that increments the variable until
But
you're.
hold on, we're not talking. So we're not talking about records. We're not talking about. I'm talking about FileMaker, and this is the scenario. This is the test right now.
Okay.
I have this array right here. That's exactly what's in the array.
Yep.
Of undetermined length. Clue. The count. We'll get the variable length count is 7. What do I do? What do I write next? What's my next? You're giving a tutorial right now. What
That
would you?
variable $i equals 0 or 1, depending on how you feel.
Okay. Well, how do you feel? That's what I'm saying.
I
See,
feel,
not
I feel like 1.
you feel like a 1. So what am I doing? Somebody take the wheel here. Jason, go.
Set variable $i 1.
Yep.
Okay. So you start a counter. This is a current count.
Duplicate that and put it in the bottom of the loop and add
Or
a
0 if it's JSON array.
Thanks.
I wanted count.
Okay, Jason, you got the wheel. You got the helm.
Okay, duplicate line 6 and drag it to right before end loop. And add +1.
Yep.
So there's I plus 1?
Oh yeah, sorry, add $i, $i plus.
Okay, got it.
Okay, now put in exit loop if after line 21.
So exit loop if, yep.
If $i is greater than dollar length.
Dollar length, yeah.
Yeah, I forgot though. We don't know the length of this. It could be 0. So I
There we
actually,
go. I was just about to nail you on that, but thank you.
yeah, I actually would have started the I at 0 and put the exit loop at the top.
Yeah. So here's the real design pattern. Out of all of this, here is this: do you exit at the top or the bottom of the loop? Right. The top is when you may not do something in the loop. You may not be doing it. The
I
bottom
usually-
is when
usually
you at
do it
least
at the
you have
top.
to do it one iteration.
Yeah,
Or
I do
both.
it at the top
The
for the
top,
test.
yeah, and there are scenarios, but in this particular thing, the key was it's undetermined length, right? So we can't make the assumption. So the exit loop really has to be something up here. There has to be some kind of condition up here, and maybe this is the iteration over here. That kind of
So
thing.
change it to
Yeah.
$i is
Doesn't have to be technical. It doesn't have to be super technical, super correct, right? Sorry, what were you saying here?
$i is I don't know why I'm blanking on this.
All right.
You could do
Well, if you're going to put it at the top, then start with 0. So make your variable.
that's right.
equal
But you
0.
see what's happening here, though, right? We got 7 different ways of doing these loops.
Well, it's not though.
Right?
Really,
And it's totally fine. Yeah, it's totally fine. And that's what I'm
saying.
saying. I think what we really need to determine is the exit condition first. So my personal approach is I write the loop and I write the exit condition right away. Right. So I understand what's happening there. And I also put one of those switches in here. Right. And I put that in there as well. Because there's lots of ways of doing these iterations. Like Beverly mentioned, okay, well, we're going to probably, if I know this data is coming in as JSON, which it is in this example, then I probably should start at 0, right? Or maybe I just get rid of all of this here and I just say get first value and I just delete the first value down here, JSON delete element 0, and I just iterate until there's nothing left. Then I got rid of all these counters. There's lots of ways of doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah, but Charles, there are more complicated situations. Like normally I would
put
the exit condition up at the top, but there are times where it makes sense to put the exit condition somewhere else because you know that when a certain thing occurs, then there's no point in running through the rest of the steps, whatever the steps.
Right. So that's a good point. So that's a middle exit. So there's really the top, the middle, and the bottom. The top is when there could be a zero iterations. The bottom is when you need to guarantee at least one iteration, and there might be more, like an event log, and you want to log sub events or something like that. You need to at least do it once, most likely. And then the middle condition is if I have some kind of an error or something like that, and I need to kick out, I want to stop that execution from continuing. Right, an error case. I couldn't commit a record. The product inventory is 0, so I need to fail everything, and then I can kick out of that.
Right.
All right, we're going to leave loops for a second, but I just wanted to show that there's so many different design patterns. Some are clearly, I think, are better, and some are worse. Right? I think making certain assumptions and then patching through. I think a lot of times we sort of go and then we go, oh shoot, I got to go from 0. No, I got to go from 1, and I got to iterate, but I move things around. I think it's myself from an approach. I like to code the entire loop first, forget about the stuff that's inside, and then make sure that I understand the overall concept, because then there's a minimal amount of code and I can wrap my head around it easier.
Except I tend to put the exit condition in the loop, no matter. So that's just an empty loop with an exit condition.
Yes, I actually, what I'll do is, even when I'm coding, if it's something that's kind of live-ish, like our dev environment is technically live, I'll put an exit of true. I'll just put a 1 in there for right away until I'm ready to single step through it and walk through it. But I just wanted to point that out, because loops, I think you could get all over the place, and there's so many different ways of handling this stuff. What's interesting is we were talking about this, I think Eduardo and I were talking about this yesterday. From a JavaScript approach, there's 8, 10 different ways you can do loops, but the choice for doing those is a little clear. Like there's ways like map and reduce and for each and in, and there's all these different variable or ways of doing these. Doing these iterators. So the exit condition is very, very clear, because you almost write that. It's almost implied in the way you use the command to iterate over. But with FileMaker, it's a little different. We have this loop thing, and then we don't have anything else, like a do while or a do until or a while loop. The exit condition is very implied. All right, I want to jump into, how are we doing for time? 11:30. I want to jump into.
There's a while step now, by the way, in FileMaker.
Correct. Yeah. I want to jump into what I had some replies from a couple of developers. We put this out there, but only a couple of people replied. And I was on a quick conversation with Dan. I don't think Dan is in. He wasn't feeling well last night, so he said he wouldn't be in. But I do want to go over some of the notes that he sent me, and because I think they're pretty good. This is really, really rough, so I'm just going to go over it. Just to give you a bit of background about Dan. Dan's a really, really meticulous, exceptionally brilliant FileMaker developer. Not just FileMaker developer, but just programmer, developer, problem solver that way. He's the guy who wrote the original JSON custom functions before FileMaker had custom functions. And as well as the scripting. He's done a number of different other things. He wrote some connectors for QuickBooks to FileMaker, and a number of other projects. Right, his code is exceptionally thorough, and if there's anybody I'd want to have review my code, it'd probably be him, because I know he's going to find little flaws and bugs in it, and he's almost bang on right with all of them. So just to give you a bit of background here. So he says scripting, doing white spaces and chunks, that's kind of a design pattern for him. So he gave me an example of some scripts where he put these chunks, and he does it by separation of function, I guess you could say, in here. And he also does something else in here too, which I thought was kind of interesting. And he mentions this here. I think white space in script is often underrated. And coinciding with that, he uses this dollar variable thing. And basically what it is he sets a variable to a value. And this is his naming convention for his variable. We don't generally use this because we work in a lot of JavaScript, and that .NET will mess things up in the context of other languages, but it's fine here. And he says he sets a variable called $modify context, and then another one he does a find save. And what he's doing here is he's logging He's got some other code, some other apparatus that's running in here. And it's effectively setting a key in a logger so that if there's a problem, he knows exactly where this piece of code went. That's how he's kind of almost got like built-in testing to his code. So that's what he's doing here as a design and in terms of shape. And if you watch that Uncle Bob video, he talks about code and what code should look like. And he makes some really, really good points. Like I can almost tell when I see code as to who wrote it in our team here. If you think about the code, the shape of this code, it kind of goes like this. And you could almost turn these into like gray block boxes, and I could say, okay, this is the person who wrote this. And if I see something that goes like this, I can almost tell, like, yeah, I know exactly which developer wrote that in our team, right? And one of the things that in that Uncle Bob video that he really, really stresses is kind of have your code look like a little bit Christmas tree-ish, right? So it's just like this small bits, really, really lots of white space, because that's how we process stuff. And I think that's a really, really, it's just a simple thing. I don't know if it's a design pattern as such, but it's a prettiness pattern. And I think it really does make a difference. Does anybody have a real special way of writing stuff like this?
Struggling with it.
Pardon me?
I'm struggling with it. I'm working in groups these days, and there are so many, or not so many, but other developers have different patterns. And what I try to do is to adjust. So I don't put in my section in a script with a different pattern. That's my basic approach. If they use one pattern, I try to mimic that pattern.
Same thing for file names, naming conventions, all of that kind of stuff.
Not necessarily. There are some key points I insist on my approach, but especially if there is no clear approach. If one thing in one table, the key field is named one way and the other table it's named in the other way, I try to keep my part consistent. But if there is consistency in whatever I am working with, I try to learn and follow that set of rules.
Something else he mentions here, he writes his code in chunks, and he gives the sections names. Now, in this case, he's also kind of self-documenting, because this logging mechanism that he's got in here, or debugging mechanism, it also is including what the variable, what's happening here. This is the find save record. This is the set variables, and so on. He says logging is another underrated item, right? He does a lot of logging. He's actually got an open source logging routine. It's pretty in depth. It takes into account things like, and it does almost everything except for what line in the code that the problem arose. So that for a debugging aspect, his first line of debugging is to go through the logs. Me personally, my first line of debugging, because I don't do as much logging like that, we do a little bit in our applications, but not generally enough, is to more kind of walk through and I kind of look at the big picture and think what could have happened, and then set some tests and things like that from there. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of logging, because that's a whole other thing, but even something as simple as just writing a record with the script results, the get script parameter and the exit script result is already tremendous insights into your application. We asked him, how do you go about debugging? And he basically says error trapping. That's his biggest thing here, right? And that's, again, it's what works for you, but this is one of his sort of design patterns as such. This is one that we were talking about as well, and I don't know if everybody does this, but if a script ever returns a result, it should always return a result. So if it ever returns a result, it always returns a result. And the reason for that is if you have something in here like get script parameter, oops, I can't do that in here. I got to do a set variable. But if you do a get script parameter, or sorry, get script result, that script result may come from a prior script result. So if I'm doing a perform script here, if I'm doing a perform script here, and then later on I do another perform script, And this one here returns a result. It returns some result here. And I'm looking at that result and I do some stuff. And then I call the second script and that returns a result. This does not need to be in a loop or by any means. Okay. That if this script did not explicitly set the exit script result or exit script parameter, the result that's read by this will be this value from here. So I'll just say that again. You call two scripts, script A, process B. Process A returns a result, 17. Calls process B, and for some reason you kicked out of that script or it does something and you were expecting a result, but one of the exit conditions did not have a result in it. This value will be 17 is from the first value here. Okay, so in other words, unless this overrides the value, the previously cached get script result will be in play there. So that's a kind of a gotcha there. And as a design pattern, when something exits, if you're exiting a script, always exit. If you look at the BetterForms loops, hooks, I should say, let me find an example. Hook is here. Here's an on-form request. You'll always see this. It says, do not modify below this line, and it just exits with 1. The reason we do that is partially for that. And we can also now programmatically check if that script actually ran. So we can say, hey, we throw an error because you're trying to call this on-form request hook, but we don't know if the developer is accidentally said, I'm not using this, let me just delete the script, right? And thinking that they're cleaning up their code. Well, then when they go to add something in, they add in the wrong spot or something. So that's the reason why you see that in there. It's for that exact reason there. So we can actually guarantee that we can test if that script ran and not just somebody deleted a line.
You could also maybe just return the script name as a result. If you're just returning 1, maybe that would be useful.
It would be, but then I'd have to have some apparatus above that, I guess, to catch that. And if it's working, that's great. But it's when it's not working, that's when I really need to catching it, I think. All right. So that was one of them I thought that was kind of interesting. Agnes gave me some interesting things here too, right? Script writing. She tends to copy and paste. I think a lot of developers do this. If she has to write it from scratch, she will, but otherwise she copy pastes and mutates. I'm tending to do this less and less myself. I don't know. Do you guys, when you start with an existing script and just hack it up, or start fresh?
I hack it up a lot.
I start fresh. I do the copy and paste thing, and then I realize that it takes me longer to modify it than if I just start from new logic. But that's just me. I copy and paste bits, not the entire script.
Same here.
Depends, yeah.
Yeah,
I set up at the beginning, I set up templates and then never use them. So that's.
I find, I personally find that it's faster to just type it out again. It gets your head back in the game. You're copying and pasting. You're trying to do your shortcut. And for me, again, this is a design pattern. It's a workflow pattern. So for me, when I try to take shortcuts, I have to recreate everything from scratch because I can't remember enough. You know, when I'm going through and searching and replacing and things like that, and then you miss one little thing and stuff like that. But again, it's what works for you. She actually mentioned about the table occurrence. Somebody mentioned about that, not having too many table occurrences. Data modeling and things like that, and getting a big picture. I tend to work with Whimsical, just design tool that actually we're not in right now here. I tend to do this a lot because that's just the way I wrap my head around things. I know some people, one of the people on our team prefers to have everything written. I don't read enough. So I can't see something in a big written form. How do you guys go about designing something right from the get-go? Do you think about it in terms of an image, or like visually? Do you lay it out on paper, or do you just start coding, pseudocode?
Pseudocode and visualization. I hate the reading part. That's crazy. I know I had to cooperate with developers who did everything, naming, and wrote novels. I had to translate it to visuals.
Yeah, I prefer visuals. I start with a very simple ERD first, with like what I think is the main I guess object or table, and then work my way out. And then I find the ERD really helps me decide, how many initial tables I'm going to need. Because once you see it out, you go, oh wait, what about this idea? And then you can suddenly add in another box for another table occurrence. And from the ERD, you can work. You can then think about how you want to structure your table occurrence graph.
I create a big mind map of what I want my app to do, and from there I decide which tables I'll need, what fields I'll need. It kind of just wraps my head around the entire concept, and once I have the concept clear in my head, the rest really sort of comes very easily, right? Oh, I need this, I don't need this, and it evolves. It's an evolving creature. It becomes simpler and simpler as I work on it. That's really my biggest tool is my mind map. It's always being updated, like constantly, to match what I'm doing, either in FileMaker or BetterForms.
I think it's a good approach, is to really, like, I do a ton on one-on-one onboarding, and a lot of people sometimes just want to start, okay, I got some tables, I just want to start adding fields and stuff like that because it's easy. So it gives us, I guess, maybe a quick rush or something. But it's always better to kind of step back and say, okay, what is my given workflow, and let me really understand what the problem is I'm trying to solve. Like Rick said, I find that tends to work a lot better. I tend to use diagrams a lot when I'm talking with our team, because we can put notes and we can kind of compile that, and then we can add more stuff in there as needed. I don't know if they use them as much afterwards, but I think it's a good way of sharing that knowledge.
Anybody ever just use just straight document, just start typing names and then tabbing in, just old school tabbing in to kind of see possibly what relationships you have, all the fields you can, and it's just a Word doc. You just go up and down and you start mentally mapping that.
I know somebody, one of our team, Jason on our team, does that. For me, it doesn't work, but
It's like one element of the data model. Then the other one is kind of what Rick was talking about, mind mapping also is good. Like what does this thing have to do? And then you start realizing all the tables around that map in the mind. So there's just components, but you're right in the part of don't jump right into FileMaker. Take that step back and find your medium of choice to really take a bird's eye view of what you're about to get into, because it makes it cleaner down the road.
Agreed. How are we doing? We only got about 10 minutes left here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch base on one other design pattern that we use quite a bit, and we'll stay away from stay out of the BetterForms stuff. But this is kind of a slight bit of BetterForms, but mostly a FileMaker design pattern. And I've talked about it lots before. We call it API first design. It's a common industry type thing, and it basically means that you're creating. Let me see if I got a drawing here. I won't get into too much detail, but basically the idea of API first is, let's go here. I'm just going to give you a really, really quick run through. And this is kind of, we end up creating a script. We got a user interface level, and we need to create some emails. So we create a script that sends an email. Pretty simple. We duplicate it because we need to send some batch emails. No worries. I got that, duplicate that script. I changed a couple lines in the template and this and that, and or in the script settings, send mail settings, and it works great. And then they come up to us and they say, do we use MailChimp? I saw an ad at the airport when I was walking through the airport. Let's use MailChimp. That's the way to go, right? To send emails. We say, okay, well, we duplicate that again. We add in the MailChimp insert from URL, and we had that connection, right? But you can see that we're starting to build up some cruft here. And then it says, Jennifer didn't get her email. So, okay, well, we better add some logging element into that. And then we call the MailChimp maybe logs if Jennifer got her email. And somebody else says, well, mails are great, but I'm on my phone all the time. I want an SMS. So now we're starting to build something else out with this SMS. And if we kind of have an idea that the system is going to grow in this direction, which any enterprise-y, business-y system is if it's not growing, it's dead anyway. So it's almost a guarantee that it's going to start to grow into some complexity. If we start looking at this in a little bit different approach, where we have things like UI handlers in terms of levels. And I'm not saying to do this right away. BetterForms, if you're already building stuff in BetterForms, you don't even realize, but you're doing this because we put the scripts in this kind of a structure to begin with. We have the UI level stuff. That's the stuff that stays in the context of the UI. And same thing as FileMaker, it's contextual. And then we pass that on to some kind of business logic level, which is another layer of script. But the main idea of this business logic, it doesn't necessarily come from the front end. Duplicate invoice feature. Well, if I wanted to duplicate an invoice, a user at some point probably pushes a button. But what if I have an automated routine that sends an invoice out once a month to somebody? It needs to find the last invoice and effectively duplicate their order again. So that's not a UI driven thing. So that means this script effectively would accept JSON coming in, and it would probably return JSON going out, but it can be automated. Whereas this is contextual. You can't automate contextual things as easily. Right. And then that particular script might go into something a little bit getting more into a services layer. And again, this is a common industry type of stuff. Services are a given set of code that performs one primary action, or it serves in one purpose. So this would be a notification handler of some sort. So I send it in any kind of notification object, maybe JSON object, and I say maybe the type would be email or the transport would be email. The recipients might be, or the locators might be Charles at fmbetterforms.com, something like that. Then that service abstracts everything below it, right? So from the caller, they don't really care about how it's handled. I just need to send an email. So that can now connect to some type of an email service or subservice level, or an SMS level, or maybe a logging service, or whatever it may be. And then finally that connects up to MailChimp. Now this may look really complicated, but really this is just about 3 scripts deep here, right? This here is really 3 scripts deep, and this is the UI level. And maybe some early business logic. We have a number of videos and stuff like that on architecture like this. But as a design pattern, when your app starts to grow, the exponential rate of conventionally coding stuff up, where we're just adding a script to do everything, this goes up. It keeps getting harder. The software keeps getting harder and harder to maintain. Whereas this one actually goes the opposite. It gets easier and easier, because every one of these blocks from about here down is 100% reusable by any upper layer service. So that's the whole idea of API kind of first design, is everything is handled from an API perspective. A good example of that is if you ever logged into Stripe. When you go into Stripe and you use their interface is actually driven through their API. So they've separated the whole front end, and it's actually using their actual API. And it even shows you the calls that the front end, when you click a button and you send an invoice in Stripe, it shows you the API instruction that got ran in the lower level, because they have a clear separation between the services layer and the UI layer, or at least that's more like the UI and the business logic layer. So anyhow, that's something that's, if you're interested in that, we have some videos on our Friday Live talking about API first design. There's maybe 2 or 3 videos that we've done. They're all pretty much similar, more or less the same thing here, but just broken out into an hour and a half instead of 10 minutes. I think we're just about out of time here. Unfortunately, I have to end reasonably quick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop our video, but before I do, I want to thank everybody for coming out today. We're not going to jump off right away. You can still hang around, but thanks for coming out. I think we had some really good conversations today, and it was I really appreciate that, because that was the whole goal.
Charles, can I just interject one small idea for a few seconds?
Mhm.
I haven't seen a lot of people really use color in their relationships, other than, you know, painting a whole group in a certain color. So I just wanted to give an example of what I do. I give every base table a color, so I can easily identify tables in a table group, in a table occurrence group. So I put a link just to show you what it looks like. But I just haven't seen it much around. I just don't know why people don't use color that much, but I think it's pretty useful.
I always
that was
struggle
my
to
30
find
cents.
out where to put the color in. Where is it? Well, which one is it?
It's in the
Yeah,
middle,
the
I
gray
think.
one.
I did it
Beside the
as
trash can.
as a standard.
Trash
Just I started working with a developer who was colorblind, and then I was told not to do that.
I'm fairly colorblind, and it's there's different kinds of red, green. Is for me, and only in small pixels. And as long as you don't get too close, it's not too bad. If you're
it helps some people, you know, and you know, maybe it doesn't help everybody, but you know, 10% of men are colorblind. It's to some level.
Yeah,
I went for shades of gray. Yeah.
I prefer 50, but yeah.
Just an idea anyway.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to stop this recording. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you, Charles.
Yeah, thanks, Charles.
Thank you.
I'm trying to find my stop recording here. It's pretty bad.
Great job, Charles. Good discussion.